This is Susan Popoola, host of the Leading in the Mosaic World podcast, with a special series on being a man in today's world. As of late, I found myself increasingly conversing with men and focusing my work on boys and men. Boys and young men trying to find their place in the world, emerging leaders in the workspace, established leaders navigating increasingly complex environments, and successful men missing a sense of real fulfillment. It all points to the question of what it means to be a man in today's world. A question fundamental to men, for gender harmony, and for a Mosaic world in which everyone is valued for who they are and what they have to offer to the world around them. Join me as I explore this subject with a rich diversity of men and women too. Thank you. This is a special series of the Leading in the Mosaic World podcast on being a man in today's world. My guest today is Mark Brooks. Mark is a sector leader, thought leader, conference speaker, media spokesperson, and national policy advisor on men and boys issues, including male health, masculinity, male suicide, boys' education and employment, inclusion, and domestic abuse. He received an OBE in 2019 and an honorary doctorate from University of West London in 2023 for his work in these fields. Among his many roles, he is the Director of Policy and Communication for the Centre for Policy Research on Men and Boys, Senior Communication and Policy Advisor for Men and Boys Health, Education, Inclusion and Domestic Abuse, a policy advisor for the All Parties Parliamentary Group on Boys and Men's Issues, the chair of the Mankind Initiative, which is a domestic abuse charity, national ambassador for International Men's Day UK, the trustee for the Association of Male Health and Wellbeing, and an associate for the Men's Health Forum. I don't know where he gets the time for all of this from, but somehow he does it, and I'm looking forward to finding out more about all of it. Thank you very much for being my guest today, Mark.
Well, it's a pleasure, Susan, and thank you for all the great work that you're doing as well. Yeah, I don't sleep much, and I have to bribe my wife with a curry every Saturday night to make sure she doesn't go down the solicitor's office.
Okay, well.
So, yeah, it's been a long journey on men and boys policy, but obviously not just me. There's loads of others who are doing great work in the fields. It's a real team effort.
Yeah, which is important. I mean, you don't always need a lot of people, but as they say, a few good people can really change the world and make an impact. So thinking about men and boys, you were once a boy yourself. Where were you born and raised, and what was life like for you growing up?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So listeners may tell that I'm from South East London. I've got this kind of monotone, dreary voice in terms of accent, and that's where I'm from. So I'm from Belvedere, which is in between, if you know the area, it's between Erith and Woolwich. That's where I'm from. That's where I was brought up. I went to school in Bexley, which is in South East London, which is the borough I live in. Went off to university in the late 80s to Keele in Staffordshire, which is just outside Stoke. It's a wonderful university. Then effectively came back and then started working in communications, tried to be a indie rock star in the backs of vans, playing gigs around the country, etc. Never worked, but it was great fun. So that's my background. A son of a van driver as well, South East London. So very much brought up in the working class community, which I still live in.
Yeah. What was it like? I mean, as you mentioned, actually, I do know the area of Erith. I actually lived there many years ago. So I do know that area reasonably well, though it's changed quite a lot through the years. But I'm just curious because That's like outskirts of London, between London and Kent, the area that you grew up in. As you mentioned, working class, son of a fan driver. What was life like for you as a boy? What were the great things about it? What were the things that were challenging and frustrating?
Yeah, that's a great questions. So I grew up, I suppose, so I'm 56. So I was born in 1970. And so my formative years would have been late 70s and the 80s. And it was a bit of a roller coaster. I mean, people can't imagine the world back then. I mean, you had 3 TV channels, eventually went up to 4. Email, internet, mobile wasn't invented. We were going through a lot of economic upheaval. In other parts of the country, you know, the money was always tight. It was a because my dad was self-employed during those times. It meant that there wasn't much money around, but to be fair, there wasn't much money around anywhere. And in the community I was living in, it was there wasn't a lot of money. Also, it was very regimented. I mean, the great things that have happened in the last 30 years, I know people may not always feel it, is that we've got so many more options and freedom and opportunities now than you had in that time. I mean, some of that's obviously driven by the web, but there was a general view in society where whatever class you were brought up in, that was the class you were going to stay in. And I remember, part of the reason we lived in Bexley, my family originally from Greenwich, is because Bexley had kept grammar schools. My dad was a real big fan of grammar schools as a way of social mobility. Isn't so much an issue now, but again, if you go back to the 1970s, social mobility just was not a thing. It just didn't happen. And grammar schools at the time were a way of socially engineering grammar schools for kids, smart kids, in inverted commas, from working class backgrounds. You could short circuit the system. And therefore, I went to the local grammar school, Beth's, and then I managed to get to university. And the thing was, I went to university in 1988, and the thing was, nobody in my community went to university. I mean, it wasn't that they weren't smart enough, because that's the thing about the class system and the way things were then. The people around me were as smart as me. Because I got to the grammar school talked about university. Comprehensive schools around here never actually pushed the kids, my peer group, into university. They didn't even discuss it as an option. It just wasn't even a thing. Oh, you go to this school, you're from this community, you'll never get to university. Even though, of course, all the teachers teaching had been to university. So it being the issue, and it's really where I started to see where there was structural disadvantages in the UK around class opportunities, class assumptions, and also around gender assumptions as well, about what men and boys were meant to do and what women and girls were meant to do. And so that kind of injustice is what's really driven me.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much within what you said. But the first thing is, you spoke about what it was like for you growing up. Things were difficult. There wasn't a lot. I suspect that if you speak to a number of young boys in this current climate in the UK, they might have a similar view in terms of things are difficult. I just wonder, from your experience, your observations and working and talking to boys, how would you say the world of boys has evolved from when you were young to now?
Yeah, that's very sound. And a really important question, because what we're seeing is an issue of disconnection. And also what we're seeing is a disconnection from their ability to participate and do as well, if not better, than their parents. And at that time, in the 70s and 80s, there was always an assumption that you could do at least as well as your parents, if not be better than your parents. Of course, it was an issue if you weren't. There was an air, especially in the 80s, of being able to get on lots of communities, that wasn't the opportunity, especially around deindustrialization. I'm talking about my experience. So it's an air of opportunity of getting on. And I think for so many young men and boys, that feeling of the opportunity to get on is not there. You can see that in terms of the number of young men who are not in education, employment, training. It's about 500,000 now. Male youth unemployment's going up. Figures around 300,000, highest in 10, 11 years now, male youth unemployment. We're also seeing that lack of not doing as well at school. So, are way behind girls. Girls are doing far better at school than boys are. And obviously you're seeing some young men, and certainly not all young men, feeling that they won't be better off than their parents and struggling to find work, get on the housing ladder, start a family. The normal things that both men and women want to do seem further away for so many young men. And that means getting on, getting a job, owning a car, leaving the home, starting a family, and owning a home seem further away. So a lot of those, so the worry is that in the 70s and 80s, there was the opportunities to get on. Now far too many young men feel that it's too hard to get on, so they're giving up.
Why is that? I mean, what is it that is making it so hard for them in comparison to girls and young women?
I think there's a number of issues, and of course there's loads of challenges that young women and girls still face. So, my policy focus is on young men and boys, but of course that's still fully acknowledging the huge number of barriers that young women and girls have. So I never view these things as a competition.
I always, just to interject briefly, I always say it's not or, it's and.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and so in terms of those particular challenges, I think one of them is that I'm picking up, and I've been sensing it for a while, culturally and through the education system and politically with a small p, is that the narrative has developed, and we're starting to move away from it, but it has developed. It's been there for some time, where basically all young women and girls have problems, and all young men and boys are problems. And the focus is on telling young men and boys what not to do, rather than helping them with what to do. And there's this narrative that's just been basically seen as that young men and boys are a problem. They're just a problem, or we can't do anything because they're young men and boys and they're just a pain in the backside. And, why is it that they're not on the front foot as much as girls, or as much down to lazy men and boys, etc. And no one started until recently to look at the world that young men and boys live in. So a really great analogy that I heard a couple of years ago from a health expert, actually, looking at male health in Africa. And I mean, it's a great line. And she basically said, if all the fish in the lake are like dead, do you still focus on the individual fish, or are you looking at what's in the lake? And the lake being the analogy for the society. So it's about the societal issues around young men and boys. There's a narrative that they're a problem. They're not being pushed. Because they're seen as a problem and people giving up, they're not pushed as much. They're not encouraged enough. They're not pushed enough at school. Schools don't have as high expectations. And also a number of them are lacking male mentors. And if they're in a community, they've got family dysfunction, they've got community dysfunction, whereas the community is not pushing and hasn't got an air of aspiration, which will primarily be driven by the lack of work and the lack of jobs, so it's not that community's fault, then that inbuilds this, what I call a malaise over so many young men and boys. Now, of course, it's not all young men and boys, and it's not all young men and boys in certain areas, but there is a sizable cohort of young men and boys from different ethnicities that we should be concerned about. And one thing just on the ethnicity issue, I've really picked it up and I've been pushing against it, is that a lot of the narrative and commentary around young men and boys has been looking at white working class uh, young men and boys. Understandably, at one point, because there's just more of them in the UK, so there's a volume issue. But I am concerned about the plight of young Black British men and boys. No one really wants to talk about that, and also there'll be other groups as well. I'm always interested in that. Just nobody wants to talk about that issue, but so those young men and boys are obviously suffering general issues affecting them because of their gender, but also there's obviously racial and economic dimensions to that as well.
Yeah, I'd love to know. I mean, as you said, there are other groups as well, but specifically when it comes to white working class boys and Black boys, what are one or two of the specific issues that they are typically faced with beyond the general issues of boys?
I think with what white working class boys, I still think there's class barriers. Also, I think there's a lack of job opportunities and that they're not being pushed. I really think that they're not. There's an assumption that they just won't get on and won't do well. And that also includes from their parents, because their parents aren't pushing them. I mean, it is great. So, for example, boys on free school meals from Chinese, Indian, and Black African communities, the boys there are doing far better than boys on free school meals from white families. So there's something culturally going on there that we need to look at, because there shouldn't be any difference because they have the same income. So there's some cultural issues there, whether that's within their culture or whether the parents' culture, whether it's the schools, I don't know. But if you looked at the figures, it's like, why is there such difference when they have the same amount of money in the household? So I think that's quite an issue. For Black British boys, I don't know. I mean, there's an issue, and it worried me. I saw figures that came out a couple of weeks ago that actually more Black British boys are far more likely to die due to knife crime than any other group. So there's something in that area that we need to look at as to why is knife crime prevalent? Why their exam results are no better than white working class boys? We need to look at that. And I think I'll be honest, because it's Black British working class boys, I think there's some sort of reluctance to actually look at that group. We need to find out what's going on, basically, and what and how to fix it, because their exam results aren't great, their unemployment rates aren't great, and also there's an issue around gangs and knife crime. Figures are saying that, so I'm not being pejorative. I mean, I was looking at figures from a university the other week about it. So we need to look at these things, not be scared of looking at them, because that means we're playing a disservice to those young men and boys.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, because I know, I mean, there, as you said, there are other stats that point to those issues with different groupings. There could be the counter argument that, well, is that where the focus has been? And if that's what you're looking at, that's what you'll see in that area. But regardless, I guess there is the need to do the research to understand what's going on in those particular areas and why those problems exist. And I guess that links into some of the work of the policy group. And I should be interviewing someone, forget his name right now, but he's done research on Black boys and their experiences. So I will let you know when I've interviewed him to find out what he says the problems are and what needs to be done. But boys in general, you've spoken about some of the issues, and it's interesting when you talk about boys being seen as a problem. It reminds me, recently I've been thinking back to an old nursery rhyme. What are little girls made of? Sugar and spice and all things nice. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
remember what boys are was said to be made of.
Was it puppy?
And puppy dog's tail.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting. That has been there for a long time, even though it wasn't necessarily seeing boys as a problem. It wasn't a nice way of describing or thinking of boys. And you could say it was just a poem, or it was just a joke, or it wasn't serious. But I suspect things like that, they permeate. I mean, there's a reason why we all know the nursery rhyme. It's because people thought it was okay to say it, and they thought there was something in it. But I'm just interested with that. You mentioned earlier the gender assumptions, and I guess you've already touched on a number of the negative gender assumptions about boys. What do we do? How do we ensure, while we still pay attention to the challenges that girls and women are faced with, what do we do to better support boys to be the best that they can be and active members of our communities at all levels?
Thank you. I think that there's a bit of a journey, and then I'll go into a bit of a detail. So in terms of the journey, I mean, where we've got to now is that we've got people generally, when I say I'm talking about government, local councils, broader society, and academics and charities and others, actually accepting they're looking at the data. I mean, part of the problem was the data. I'm a bit of a data geek, but I'm only interested in the data because of the stories the data tell. The data's been there for ages, and part of the job, myself, my colleagues at the research centre, but other charities you mentioned, Association Male Health and Wellbeing and others, have been pushing for the last 15, 20 years, is that we've almost been saying, look at the data. The data's been there. We've been holding it up to people for ages about suicide, boys' education, unemployment, crime rates, and all of those issues. And people, especially the political class and the establishment class, have been almost like, I don't want to look at the data. I'm like shunning from the data. Don't want to look at it. It's about how can there be men and problems facing men and boys? Well, I don't want to look at it. They're almost like scared. And there was as I said, a political culture that basically, if you spoke about men and boys issues, that you would be disowned, drowned out, etc. Richard Reeves always comes up with this great line that when he was trying to get his book published of Boys and Men, loads of publishers turned him down, but also all his colleagues were telling him it was career suicide to write about young men and boys. But he persevered, because like so many, it was like, yeah, but the data's telling us we can't run away from the data. What is this telling us? So that was part of the problem. The second issue, so we've got to the stage now where people are looking at the data. Then it was like whether they would accept the data was true and accept there was an issue. And now we've got to the stage where the establishment class do see it as an issue, and now we're working out with them and helping them as part of the research centre's work is help them then find the solutions. I think around young men and boys, I mean, I think there's three areas. I mean, one of them is about we have to have this positive narrative, this kind of narrative thread that for young men and boys, we see you, we believe in you, we hear you, we're on your side, we want to make your world better. And so they need to hear that constantly, and not a narrative that you're toxic, you're misogynistic, you're a problem for women and girls, you're never going to succeed. So we have to have a positive narrative. The second area is a colleague and Nick I think we use slightly different terms, but I call them nuts and bolts of life. So in three areas, we've got to get young men and boys better educated. We've got to improve their literacy. We've got to make sure that they've got skills and that there's work for them. So with the nuts and bolts of life. And on the flip side, so that will then improve their health and well-being, because that means that they feel as though they've got hope and they've got a positive future. and they can see the pathways to actually get there, to leave home, start a family, stand on their own 2 feet. And then the last area is about supporting them, catching them when they fall. So that means, making sure that we've got adequate support for those mental health problems, also body image problems, and other issues where they're not quite succeeding. Overlaying all of that, we need to get them outside more. So we need to, we're never going to get young men and boys completely offline. I mean, that's not the world we live in now. But we need to get more young men and boys outside civic organisations like Scouts, Cadets, sports clubs, community groups, whatever activities. We need to get them outside because that really helps with their mental health, their sense of connection, sense of belonging, and sense of place in the real world. And also it will help if adults spot any signs of distress and therefore support them with that. So there's a whole host of things. I mean, big youth club initiative, a lot of investment going into youth clubs, which is really, really important. And, it's clearly that's been an issue, the closure of youth centres, youth clubs. So there's a number of practical things we can do. And then the last one is around mentors, father figures. I mean, there's around 1.5 million boys growing up in households without a dad or a stepdad in the home. So for a lot of young men and boys, they don't have a key figure that's semi-permanently in their life, teaching them and importantly showing them what it means to be a young man and then a man. They haven't got any guardrails. They haven't got anyone regulating their behaviour. There's not they in terms of a male voice because young boys look for men. They look obviously for support from their mums as well, but because they're grown up as young men, it's like, well, what does it mean to be a man? And the best people who will be able to show them that are going to be other men, and young men will look to other men for that guidance. If they're missing, they're not at home, they're not in school because there's not enough male teachers, and they're not part of civic groups where there's male leaders, and that leaves this absence of men. And that means broadly, they don't do as well at school. It also means that they have less behavioural regulation, so more likely to end up in criminal activity, etc. And that's a problem. They need men to, show them a way in conjunction with their mums and other women in their life as well.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I mean, and there's so much within that, and it's such a pertinent question because one of the reasons why I found myself drawn into the space of what's going on with boys and men, with that fundamental question of what does it actually mean to be a man in today's world, is when I was talking to people about women and women's experience. I'd written a book about women in the workplace from the perspective of men. And after some time, I had people saying to me, actually, I'm not that concerned about my daughter. I'm more concerned about my son. And I see the logic with all the things that you've said. But one of the things, when you said having a positive narrative about boys and men and that positive affirmation, I know that there are people that will push back. I've seen it, heard it myself, especially when people have heard or watched the documentary Adolescence about the boy that was, should I say, ended up murdering a girl because of how he was feeling and his experiences. And more recently, there's been the Louis Theroux documentary, Manosphere. So there are people that would say, well, these are real issues. We can't ignore them and start mollycoddling boys when they're real issues. What would you say to that?
Yeah, that's what it mean. I mean, there's a number of issues. I mean, my view of adolescence, I thought it was awful. I mean, I thought it was just so pejorative about white working class boys, and it's all its facts mixed up, and also the way it kind of was almost belittling white working class dads as well. I think it all got under my skin, and there's been a huge pushback against adolescents saying this is like, it was very helpful in getting getting the situation on in the public eye. But actually, when you look at the detail and the assumptions it made, it wasn't great. And the fact that the people kept mixing it up between saying it was a documentary, and it's like, it wasn't a documentary, it's a drama. But people think, it must be, it's so it was good for getting the subject, but it was way off beam. And there's been a huge pushback, actually. Lots of people, female and male, are just saying, no, this isn't right. It really maligned teenage boys, basically. As a group, said, look, we told you they're all a problem, and they're such a problem. They're murdering teenage girls. So that was a really important point. But the thing is, I think it comes back to the conversation. And if we want women and girls to do well, we can't have a society where men and boys are not doing as well, because a world of young men and boys is not going to help young women and girls flourish. We need to make sure that young men and boys are doing well, because not only because it's a good thing for them and their family and society and the economy and everything and the whole country, it's also a good thing for young women and girls. And so, because obviously it will mean that there'll be more positive attitudes towards young women and girls, young men and boys won't be seen as a threat. And also, let's be honest, young women and women generally will be in their 20s, be looking for male partners. Obviously not all, but lots will, the majority will. And, they will want male partners who they can feel comfortable with, but also will be able to contribute to the household, contribute to having children, etc., etc. And it's no good for those women if they start looking around in their late 20s is for men the same, if you like, social status for them, and they're missing. I mean, I go, but university is not everything, but it's a good thing in context. So every September, there's 45,000 fewer teenage boys go to university than teenage girls. So for every 100 teenage girls that go to university in the UK, there's only 78 boys. Now, the issue is that I've got female friends who've been in this position when they're in their late 20s, 30s, and thinking, right, I want to, I'd like to start a family. I'm looking for a graduate male. There's not many around because there's this big deficit. And, and as one of my girlfriends said to me, she said, it's like, it's kind of supply and demand. They're just not there.
Yeah.
So that's an outcome of, I mean, that might be being a bit flippant, but the issue is that for women and girls to flourish, we have to have flourishing men and boys as well.
And I agree with you once more on that point. I talk about creating gender harmony, and that's where girls, women, boys, men are able to be their best selves and to live together harmoniously. And when we talk about boys and men, as you say, it's just as much for women and the rest of us as it is for boys and men. So we're quite aligned in that thinking.
Well, I've just written it down, so gender harmony.
Okay.
If you hear me saying that, I'll have to pay you a agent's fee. I think that's brilliant. So I've written that down. I'm using that.
Okay, noted that. There's one thing I'm just thinking. You've spoken about the assumptions about boys and men, and specifically from working class backgrounds. And I'm just thinking, what would you want people to understand about working class boys and men that they don't? What don't we understand? What don't we talk about that we need to?
Well, I think what we need to talk about, and what we need to look out for them. So I think there's just been an assumption that men and boys will be all right in the end. And so we need to, and that they're a problem, which I've spoken about. But there's been an assumption that young men and boys, they'll work it out. They'll be all right in the end. And many do, of course, but many don't. And I think in terms of, and we can't make assumptions that because somebody's a young man that they will be all right. And I think that there are assumptions that it will just happen. There's the assumptions that young men and boys don't have problems. Again, that's an assumption that is not true, especially as I said, I see employment is so fundamental to this because employment gives men an identity. It gives men a sense of purpose. It helps them feel that they're being of service to either themselves or their families, and also it gives them a sense of belonging as well. So work is absolutely fundamental. And with so many young men not in work, and then men are actually at the other end of the spectrum of these men, the unemployment in that area is going up as well. And I worry about the impact of AI and other things about entry level jobs. We make assumptions that for young men it will be all right in the end, but for far too many it won't be. And even if some men do make it, young men make it, they may be scarred by the experience of society was against me, for example. So we can't make those assumptions. We need to look out for every single young man to make sure that they have the tools and the pathways to get on in life. I said, working class background, so try and use, terms I hear in the community I live in, just getting on, just being able to get on in life.
And when you say some will make it and some don't, I guess there are those that will thrive. There are those that will just get on. And I guess that's just getting by on a day-to-day basis. In my mind, for some, not all, but for some, that might lead to negative behaviors and attitudes. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. And then there are others who, when you say don't make it, what comes to my mind, I start thinking of the suicide levels. Is that part of it?
Yeah,
when you say not make it, or how else would you describe not making?
The flip side is, what is making it? And I think making it is being able to be happy and productive in your life in whatever way, because you don't want to be prescriptive about, that means you've got a family, because a lot of guys don't want families, whatever. But being happy and positive and basically feeling that you have a sense of success, sense of service, sense of positive well-being. And I spoke at some talk and said, well, what do you mean sense of success? And, that was really pushing men. I said, well, men wouldn't want a sense of success, but it's how you define success. So success may be just having a happy wife, partner, enjoying your work, etc. So the sense of success is a sense of contentment, positivity about your life, however you choose that. But we see the outcomes. So we've got 90,000 men in prison right now in the UK. 90,000. FA Cup final capacity at Wembley's 90,000. Look at the crowd. That's how many men are in prison right now in the UK. You've got suicide rates going up. There's 14 men a day now died by suicide. Pre-COVID, it was 13 men. It's now up to 14 men. The figures don't look as though they're going down. We're seeing school exclusions. So about 7,000 boys are excluded from school every single year in England. And also we're seeing continuing increases in general mental health problems, but also other health problems like obesity, and also in terms of addictions as well, deaths by drink and drugs. So there is real costs to not only those individual men who don't make it, but also wider society. The missed problems that causes their families, the communities, the opportunity cost of not having productive men in the workplace or in society. And of course, the impact that that it has on others. So many men in prison because of crimes they've committed. Well, that has a cost for society, but also a cost for women and girls, not only from their families, but also, many of those men will be in prison rightly because of the crimes they've committed personally against women and girls. There's an economic, cultural and societal imperative to make sure that all men and boys are on the front foot living positive, happy, contented lives. It's just an imperative for all of us.
And I agree totally. It's interesting because one of the things I say when people talk about the negative things that some men do, the need for men to be allies, our mental health, I say ultimately we want men to be happy and fulfilled. If they're happy and fulfilled, they're not going to do negative things. They're literally going to support others and mental health challenges diminish. As you were talking, one of the things I have always said is if men are happy and fulfilled in line with what you described, those that do bad things or negative things are not likely to do so. We talk about men supporting others and being allies. They'll be in a much better position to do so. And at the same time, mental health challenges will diminish. With what you've described, in many ways, it sounds like a crisis, if not for all, for some men, or should I say a crisis that we as a society or societies are faced with. I know there's what's being done at a policy level, what organizations are doing, but for the concerned individual, the mother, the father, just that person in society and the workplace or anywhere, is there one singular thing that you would say that we can do to help make things better?
Basically, at an individual level, it comes back to that narrative to make sure that those young men and boys, men in general, who are going through a period of crisis, is to reach out to them and make sure they understand that you are on their side. They're not alone. They're not weak, and that you're there to help them. That's the key thing. Be positive around those men and boys you think are not in a good place and help them to get out of the malaise that they feel that they're in.
Thank you. And just thinking about that, there's something about listening to them as well, and listening to men and all men. One of the spaces that I previously met you was at a conference around male domestic abuse, and we could have a whole conversation on that. But I just want to, should I say, just bring it to the awareness of people. Before I went to that conference, I thought domestic abuse was something that women are unacceptably faced with in more numbers than you could imagine, and that there are a nominal number of men that were faced with domestic abuse. But can you just give a rough idea of the numbers in terms of men that are faced with domestic abuse as well?
Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, so I chair a domestic abuse charity for men. I have done for quite a while now, so I'm a chair of the board. The figures, these are government figures and not our figures. So around 1 in 5 men at some time in their life will be a victim of domestic abuse. And it comes out every year. It's about 1.5 million men. It's not competition, but so for context, for every 5 victims of domestic abuse, 3 will be female and 2 will be male. And of course, that includes men in same-sex relationships. That means men from different ethnicities, disabled men, etc. But they make up 40%. And that's been, as I said, the government figures. So it's far more than people actually think. It's an issue that people are becoming more and more aware of, but there's still a huge lack of services and support actually available for men in the communities they live in. And also some men still get negative attitudes when they come forward. So, for example, they're not being believed or taken seriously because they're a man. Because there's still a lot of women who aren't taken seriously either because they're a woman. But, there's men who are told, well, grow a pair, man up, fight back, etc., etc. So there's still those attitudes out there with regard to men.
Yeah. And that charity is Mankind.
Yeah, Mankind Initiatives. For
people want to find out more. I just wanted to touch on that because for me, it goes back to coming alongside men. And for me, I would say listening to men.
Absolutely.
Creating the space to listen to men, not just because of domestic abuse in whatever form it takes, but genuinely listen to them so that there's that outlet. And I think that's one key thing we can do so we can tackle challenges like that affect women, but also men. And just to conclude, I'd like to conclude on a positive note because we have spoken about a number of the challenges of men. I mean, we've spoken about your experience and how you moved from a working class background, which wasn't a bad space to be in, but your journey. And we've spoken about the experiences and some of the challenges and some of the solutions. But I would just like if you could conclude on what you see as the joys of being a man. What are the best things about being a man in today's world?
Now, that is a question. I think the joys of being a man in today's world are often the same joys that they've always been. And that's always been of service to other people, with your friends and your family, and also feeling that you've got a positive role to play, and not only in terms of society, in terms of the economy, our country, but also our families and communities. So the joys of being a man today is that you still have a role, you still have a vital, important part to play, and there's opportunities to carry out that role.
Yeah, you have to, something that strikes me with what you said, it seems that a lot of that is all about other people of service. But for you personally, is there anything like in of yourself, purely for you, almost selfishly, that makes you happy, aside from Charlton Football Club winning?
Yeah, but that's rare, so I'm not happy often about that. I think, and there's a great book by a chap called Tim Samuels called Somebody Stole My Spear, and it's about being a man, and basically is a sense of respect. So I think for me internally, I think for many men, it's basically the fact that you feel valued by others. So you feel respected and valued by others. That's really important to men, really important to me. So internally, I feel I'm being valued and respected. And that's really men wouldn't.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, I've most definitely enjoyed speaking to you. I value the work you do, who you are, and what you bring to the world. And for anyone else who would like to connect with you and what do you do, how do people find you?
Well, I think the best way is simply go LinkedIn now. I mean, that's the in place. So follow me on LinkedIn, connect with me on there. That will be best way to connect with me and to connect with my work. In addition, go to the Centre for Policy Research on Men and Boys, which is menandboys.org.uk, and follow our work there. So obviously I have a big input into that. You can follow us on our website or on LinkedIn as well. So LinkedIn is the place to be. Mark Brooks and the Centre for Policy Research on Men and Boys. 2 places to go.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for being my guest today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for today's conversation. I hope you found it insightful. Get in touch and let me know what you think, or if I or any of my guests can be of support to you. Until next time, this is Susan Popoola, working towards the creation of a Mosaic World. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Leading in the Mosaic World podcast. Do visit our website at www.mosaicworld.live to find out more about what we do and how we can be of support to you. Alternatively, connect with me, Susan Popoola, spelt Popoola, on LinkedIn, and let me know what you think of the podcast. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, give it a first-class rating, and tell everyone you know all about it. Thank you.